You ever walk outside and see something so outrageous, so impossible, your brain just flat out refuses to process it? Yeah, that was me last Saturday. I'm Jackson Lowell, 39, war vet turned full-time mechanic, and I own a modest 5-acre property out in the quiet town of Oakridge Glen. Well, it was quiet. That was before Teresa Penwick took over as president of the Silver Pines HOA. Teresa is the kind of woman who carries a clipboard like it's an extension of her spine. Mid-50s, bleach blonde perm, sunglasses even when it's raining, and a voice that could cut drywall. She's the queen of "you can't park that here, and your trash bins are visible from the street." You get the picture. Now, technically, I'm part of the HOA because my house falls just inside the Silver Pines district line. But my back 2 acres, not covered, it's private land zoned separately. I've made that clear every time she's shown up demanding I trim the wild grass for community aesthetics. So you can imagine my surprise when I walked out to grab a wrench from my truck and saw 3 porta-potties, a white tent the size of a football field, and rows of white chairs being set up on my back lot. I blinked, twice. There were caterers unloading trays, a DJ testing sound, and a guy in a tux yelling into a headset. My lot looked like the cover of a wedding magazine. I marched up to the nearest guy in a polo shirt who looked like he was in charge. "Hey, what the hell is this?" I barked. He looked up from his clipboard. "You must be the property owner. Yeah, we're all set for the Penwick wedding. Bride wanted a rustic vibe. You've got the perfect space." I stared. "The what wedding?" As if summoned by rage itself, Teresa swept onto the scene in a lavender pantsuit, barking orders like she was directing a Broadway show. "Oh, Jackson, there you are," she said, not even pretending to look guilty. "I knew you wouldn't mind. You weren't using this land anyway. You're hosting a wedding on my land," I said, my voice rising. "Without asking me," she waved a hand like I was being silly. "It's for my daughter. It's just one day. You should be honored. Besides, it's part of the neighborhood aesthetic." "It's not part of the HOA," I snapped. "This land's private. I told you that 3 times already." "Well, it's all one community, Jackson. Don't be petty," she said, turning and walking off like her word was law. Petty. I stood there in stunned silence as 200 folding chairs were lined up on my grass. A makeshift bar was being built. Some guy even backed a food truck onto my driveway. That was the moment I decided she wasn't just going to regret this. She was never going to do it again. I didn't say another word. I didn't yell at the caterers, didn't tear down the tent, didn't start waving my deed around like a flag. Not yet. Instead, I spent the next few hours doing what I do best, paying attention. See, I'd upgraded the old tool shed near the tree line last summer, solar panels, backup batteries, the whole deal. I'd installed a few discrete trail cams around it too, mostly to keep an eye on the deer trampling my vegetable patch. Funny thing about trail cams, once you've got them, you find a lot of reasons to use them. By sundown, I had 6 hours of footage. Trucks pulling in, event staff walking the grounds, 2 rented generators being wheeled across my grass. One shot even caught Teresa passing out envelopes to the security crew she'd brought in. I zoomed in just enough to see the logo on their uniforms. Not local, hired privately, no permits posted anywhere. I made a few calls. My buddy Marcus, who works code enforcement for the county, picked up on the first ring. "Lowell, tell me you're not calling because someone parked a golf cart in your driveway again. They're throwing a full-blown wedding reception on my parcel near the creek," I said. "Tents, speakers, catering, the works. No permits, no permission. It's not zoned for events." There was silence, then a low whistle. "You're kidding. Got video of them setting up. Want me to send it?" "Send everything. I'll loop in zoning and permits. If they didn't clear this, it's a dozen violations minimum. I can get the county planner involved too." That was step 1. Step 2 was a visit to the county assessor's office the next morning. I requested a certified property boundary map and had them stamp it. I also grabbed a copy of the HOA's Articles of Incorporation. Some of it was dry legal sludge, but one section caught my eye: Section 6, Limitations of Authority. Paragraph B made it crystal clear that the HOA's governance did not extend beyond the properties explicitly listed in their charter. Mine wasn't listed. That same afternoon, I visited the sheriff's office and filed a formal complaint for trespassing, unlawful use of private land, and unauthorized commercial activity. I handed over a thumb drive loaded with time-stamped footage. The deputy on duty raised his eyebrows when he watched Teresa giving what looked a whole lot like cash payments to the security team. "This was all done without your consent," he asked. "Never asked. Never informed. Just showed up and started building like they owned it." He leaned back in his chair. "You've got enough here for criminal charges, at least on the trespassing and illegal assembly, possibly more, depending on how the payments were handled. I want to press every charge that applies." He nodded. "We'll need a few days to process everything, but you'll get a case number by Monday." By the time Saturday arrived, I had everything I needed: certified maps, legal documents, recorded evidence, a formal complaint on file, but I wasn't done yet. You don't stop a snake by cutting off its tail, you go for the head. That afternoon, I called in a favor from an old friend, Claire Donnelly, who'd just been appointed assistant DA for the county. We served together overseas. She owed me one. I sent her the footage, the documents, and the complaint filed with the sheriff. Her response came in the form of a scheduled meeting Monday morning. She didn't make promises, but she didn't have to. What I brought her was solid, but Saturday evening, that was the moment everything shifted. The wedding itself was a spectacle. Hundreds of guests arrived in rented shuttles, flooding into my backyard like it was a destination resort. There was a string quartet, a dance floor, even a portable fountain that looked like it had been stolen from the entrance of a casino. I didn't stop them. I let it all happen, because I wanted Teresa to think she'd won. I watched from my porch with a cup of coffee and a camera recording from the eaves. I waited until the exact moment the speeches finished and the music started back up. Then I stepped onto the gravel path with a clipboard of my own, only mine didn't hold violations. It held affidavits, records, and a cease and desist order, freshly notarized. I walked straight to the DJ, handed him a copy, and told him he was now legally playing on unauthorized land and could be cited. He turned white, killed the music mid-song. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Teresa stormed over, heels stabbing into my grass like she meant to hurt the earth itself. "What do you think you're doing?" she hissed. "Enforcing my rights as a property owner," I said calmly. "Here's your official notice. And just so you're aware, the county has opened an investigation into this entire event." Her face drained of color. "You're bluffing." I stepped aside as two uniformed deputies walked up the path behind me, one carrying a folder. "We're not," one of them said. "Ma'am, we need to speak with you about the unauthorized use of this property." Guests were already pulling out their phones. The caterers froze mid-salad toss. Someone knocked over a champagne flute. "You're ruining my daughter's wedding," she said, her voice shaking now. "No," I said. "You did that when you decided laws didn't apply to you." The deputies didn't cuff her, not yet, but they separated her from the crowd and started asking questions. I didn't have to say anything else. The bride, who I'd never met, came over 10 minutes later with tears in her eyes and apologized. I told her I didn't blame her. She looked like she'd just been told her mother burned down a church. The guests left in waves. The DJ packed up first. The caterers boxed up everything and drove off without saying a word. The security team disappeared the moment the deputies showed up. By midnight, my land was quiet again. Littered with paper lanterns and half-eaten cake, but quiet. Sunday morning, I walked the grounds with a notepad documenting property damage. Tire ruts from the food trucks, a cracked irrigation pipe, deep gouges near the tree line where they'd dragged in the dance floor. I sent the full report to Claire, along with photos. Monday, the county issued a citation for unauthorized commercial use of private land. Then came the fine, $27,000, and that was just the start. Claire hit me up later that week. You want to know the kicker, she said over the phone. Turns out Teresa filed a forged permit request, claimed the land was HOA owned, signed it herself but used an old HOA board member's name. I felt the air still in my lungs. That's fraud, I said slowly. Yup, Class D felony. She's facing formal charges. I didn't laugh, but I did feel something close. Monday afternoon came with a knock on my door, not from a friend, not from a deputy, but from a man in a tailored brown suit carrying a leather portfolio and a badge clipped to his belt. He introduced himself as Investigator Paul Garrison from the County Financial Crimes Division. Mr. Lowell, he said, stepping into my foyer after I invited him in. We believe there's more to this than just a trespassing case. I led him to the dining table, where I'd laid out the rest of the documents, copies of the receipts I found crumpled near the makeshift bar, and a few shredded invoices I'd pulled from the trash pile beside the tent site before it was hauled away. I'd pieced them back together the old-fashioned way, like a puzzle. One of them had Teresa's name next to a wire transfer for over $12,000, paid to a company in Nevada I'd never heard of. Garrison leaned in to examine it, then flipped open his portfolio. This company isn't licensed to operate in this state, he said. It's also connected to a shell corporation used in 3 other cases we've been investigating. All of them involve unreported cash transactions and HOA embezzlement. He tapped the edge of the document. You may have just handed us the missing link. I didn't say anything, just nodded once and leaned back in my chair. He stayed for another hour, asking questions about what I'd seen and who I'd spoken to. When he left, he took the documents, the flash drive, and the reconstructed invoices with him. By Tuesday morning, word had spread through Oakridge Glen like wildfire. Not about the wedding people were already bored of that. No, what got their attention was the sudden closure of the HOA administrative office on Birch Hollow. Paper over the windows, padlock on the doors. No notice, no explanation, just gone. I didn't have to wonder long. Claire called before lunch. They subpoenaed the HOA's financials, she said. Turns out Teresa's been issuing fake invoices to herself for years, renovation projects that were never done, landscaping contracts that didn't exist. Over $250,000, Jackson, and that's just what they've found so far. I rubbed my jaw, staring out at the back acreage. How the hell did nobody catch that? She kept everything internal, no third-party audits. The board was basically just her husband and 2 friends who signed whatever she put in front of them. But here's the kicker: she funneled HOA dues into that wedding too. A hefty chunk. That's where the Nevada company comes in. I looked down at the voicemail I'd ignored earlier. 4 missed calls from neighbors I barely spoke to. She used HOA money to fund a private wedding on land she didn't own, I said flatly. She did, Claire confirmed. And now the county's preparing a formal indictment. We're stacking fraud, conspiracy, misuse of public funds. This is going to the state level. It didn't take long for the rest of the neighborhood to wake up. That evening, a group of residents gathered in my driveway, some carrying folders, others just looking furious and confused. I recognized a few from block parties years ago. Most were people who'd kept their heads down, paid their dues, and hoped to avoid trouble. An older man named Hal stepped forward, clutching a thick binder. She's been fining me for supposed fence violations for 2 years, he said. I've paid over $4 grand. I hired a surveyor. My fence is perfectly legal. Every fine came with a different excuse. A woman in scrubs, Marissa, I think, nodded. She threatened to have my car towed for parking in my own driveway, said it was a safety hazard because it faced the street. I had to park 3 blocks away while working 12-hour shifts at the hospital. Others chimed in. Fines for lawn colors, pressure washing demands, threats of liens. One man had received a bill for repainting a curb that the county had paved over the week before. Another had been charged for tree trimming on a tree he didn't even own. I raised a hand and asked, "How many of you have documentation?" Every hand went up. I called Marcus again. This time he came out in person. He brought 2 colleagues from the county oversight office and set up a folding table on my front lawn. We spent the next 4 hours collecting statements, scanning documents, and organizing the paper trail into categories. Over 30 residents showed up by sundown. What we uncovered wasn't just vicious rule enforcement, it was a racket. Teresa had been issuing fines, then redirecting payments to a private P.O. box registered under her maiden name. The HOA's official ledger only showed a fraction of what had actually been collected. By Wednesday, the local news caught wind. A crew from Channel 7 parked across the street just before noon, filming while residents carried boxes of documents into the back of a county van. I stayed out of the spotlight. I wasn't interested in 15 minutes of fame, I just wanted peace. But Teresa, she couldn't help herself. She showed up that afternoon, face drawn, makeup caked on like armor, flanked by an attorney who looked like he hadn't slept in a week. She stood on the sidewalk, arms crossed, as Marcus walked over with a folded letter. "You're being served," he said. "The county intends to seize all HOA-controlled assets pending investigation." Her lawyer yanked the letter from his hands, scanned it, then whispered something to her. She looked around at the neighbors watching from porches, at the camera crew parked under the oak tree, at the county officials loading her HOA's records into the back of a van. Then she looked at me, her voice cracked, but she still tried to sound superior. "You think this will stop me?" I didn't answer. I just turned and walked back to the garage where I'd been rebuilding the rear axle of a '68 Barracuda. The sound of the impact wrench drowned out whatever she said next. By Friday, the HOA was officially suspended by court order. The state froze all accounts, seized computers, and shut down their online portal. Residents were instructed to stop paying dues until a special administrator could be appointed. That night, there was a cookout on my front lawn. Marissa brought ribs, Hal grilled burgers. Somebody set up a speaker and played old rock classics until midnight. People laughed, talked, shared stories they'd been too afraid to mention before. And for the first time since I'd moved into Silver Pines, I felt like I actually lived in a neighborhood, not a dictatorship. Teresa's trial is set for later this year. She's facing over a dozen felony counts. Her attorney filed for a plea deal, but from what Claire told me, the state isn't in the mood for leniency. Too many victims, too much stolen, too many lies. As for me, I petitioned the county to formally exclude my property from the HOA's jurisdiction. They approved it unanimously. I had new boundary markers installed and filed the updated plat with the recorder's office. No more gray areas, no more clipboard dictators. A few neighbors asked if I'd consider running for the new HOA board once it's reorganized. I told them I'd think about it, but between the repair shop, the garden, and a freshly poured fire pit out back, I've got enough to keep me busy. Still, I did install 2 new trail cams just in case someone else gets any bright ideas. The week following the collapse of Silver Pines HOA felt like a slow exhale after years of tension. The residents, many of whom had been too nervous to speak out before, were suddenly eager to reclaim their neighborhood. Conversations spilled over fences, people exchanged phone numbers for the first time, and lawn chairs started appearing in front yards like mushrooms after rain. But while the community began stitching itself back together, the legal gears turned far more quietly and far more ruthlessly. On the second Monday after the wedding, I got another call from Investigator Garrison. This one wasn't just about Teresa. "She wasn't working alone," he said, his voice clipped. "We've uncovered a paper trail involving one of the county land surveyors. Thought you might want to see this in person." I drove down to the county administrative building, where Garrison led me into a side office filled with folders, maps, and a corkboard littered with red string. It looked like something out of a detective drama. He pointed to a copy of a zoning map. A small corner had been highlighted. "This section here," he said, "is the area where your back acreage meets HOA boundary lines." Teresa submitted a modified version of this map 6 months ago, claimed your lot had been reclassified as shared community space. her justification. A supposed zoning error in the county's original plat filing. I stared at the map. But that never happened. It didn't, he confirmed. But someone in the zoning office signed off on the amendment, a Harold C. Wexley. Been with the office 15 years. We tracked payments into a secondary account he opened 2 months before the filing. I folded my arms. How much was he paid? $42,000, Garrison said, split across 4 deposits. All from the same shell corporation Teresa used for the event services. So she paid a county official to falsify documentation and claim my land was common property. That's exactly what she did. I leaned against the filing cabinet and let that sink in. That's not just embezzlement. No. That's conspiracy to commit fraud and unlawful modification of county records. We've already issued a warrant. Wexley was arrested this morning. I didn't ask what happened to him. I didn't have to. Garrison's tone told me everything. Wexley had flipped. By Friday, the case against Teresa expanded by 3 more charges, this time federal. Wire fraud, conspiracy to defraud a government agency, obstruction of justice. The FBI got involved after Garrison handed over the financials. Apparently, Teresa had used interstate wire transfers to hide her tracks, which brought the whole thing into federal jurisdiction. And just like that, what began as a neighborhood nuisance turned into a full-blown federal investigation. I spent that weekend helping Hal and a few others organize a neighborhood meeting. We held it in the local library's community room. I brought copies of the HOA's charter and the court order that suspended it. We weren't trying to rebuild the HOA, we were laying the groundwork to replace it with something new, something transparent. A soft-spoken woman named Ellie volunteered to draft bylaws for a new neighborhood council. She was a retired city planner, had never spoken more than a few sentences to anyone before, but once she started talking about governance models and accountability structures, people listened. The best part, not once did anyone mention fines. A few days later, I received a call from Claire. Her voice had the crispness of someone who just closed a file she'd wanted off her desk for months. Teresa took a plea deal, she said. She's agreed to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence, but it's still bad. 18 months minimum in state prison, plus full restitution. She's paying the money back, every cent we can trace, Claire replied. We've already seized her accounts. The rest will come from selling off her assets. House included. What about the board members? 2 of them are under audit, but so far no signs they knew about the deeper fraud, just complicit through neglect. They won't be allowed to serve on any governing body again, though. I doubt anyone would vote for them anyway, Claire chuckled lightly. Fair point. The restitution money was earmarked for repayment to the residents who'd been fined illegally. Marissa got back the fees she'd paid under threat of towing. Hal received a check that covered every bogus fence violation. Even the guy who'd been charged for trimming the wrong tree got reimbursed. I refused the small sum they tried to send me. Instead, I submitted a request to have it redirected to a community improvement fund. Ellie added it to the council's first budget proposal. By the end of the month, the new council held its first election. No campaign signs, no glossy flyers. Just a community hall, a few tables, and ballots printed at the library. Ellie was elected chair unanimously. Marissa took the role of treasurer. Hal oversaw community outreach. I declined a nomination. Told them my place was in the garage, not behind a desk. They respected that but asked if I'd be willing to serve as an informal advisor, especially on legal issues and documentation. I agreed. Quietly. No fanfare. 2 weeks after the election, a work crew showed up at the far end of my property. Not county workers, volunteers. They helped me regrade the spots where the wetting trucks had torn ruts into the soil. We laid new gravel, reseeded the grass, and repaired the irrigation pipe. No one asked for payment. They just showed up with gloves and shovels and got to work. That night, I stood under the stars, looking out over the now quiet field that had once held a circus of trespassers, lies, and stolen moments. The portable tents were gone. The damage was healed. The ground was mine again. And more importantly, for the first time, the neighborhood belonged to its people. Not to a clipboard tyrant, not to a fake authority, but to the folks who lived, worked, and raised families here. The following Sunday, I hosted a small cookout. No speeches. No agenda. Just burgers, music, and a fire pit. People brought chairs, kids ran barefoot across the lawn, and someone brought a homemade peach cobbler that nearly caused a fork war. At some point, Ellie sat beside me, watching the fire crackle. "You know," she said, "if you hadn't documented everything that day, if you hadn't stayed calm, this would have been swept under the rug. You realize that, right?" I shrugged. "I just didn't want it to happen again." She smiled, not the polite kind, but the kind that said something had shifted for good. It won't. And she was right. Because what Teresa forgot, what bullies like her always forget, is that control only works when people stay silent. Once one person stands up, it spreads. And in Oakridge Glen, silence had finally broken.